So we've been talking about being intimate and intimacy with God, and He's showing me different benefits we get from the intimacy. And this one just came about, really, I wasn't even thinking about it. But He was showing me as we're more intimate with Him, whenever we spend that time with Him, He was showing me that's kind of, it's getting you ready, if that makes sense. Because there was a question asked, of me, if you were in my situation, what would you do? And I knew immediately, that I would, it was about sickness, that I would go to God and just, read all the scriptures about it, about healing, about, healing, about peace, about righteousness. And I remember Creflo Dollar talking about how he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And he said for 3 days he locked himself up in his room and got nothing but the Word and, just time with God, and didn't bother with anybody, or nobody bothered him. And he went back to the doctor, it was gone. And as I was thinking about that, I thought, that may not be everybody. The reason why he knew what to do, the reason why he was able to lock himself in that room for 3 days and to receive his healing as quickly as he did, is because he already had that relationship with the Father. It was already there. And so that the relationship, the intimacy is for now, but it's not just for now, it's for the future. And so I was thinking about that yesterday, and I was sitting on our back porch, and I have a hibiscus plant. I don't know if y'all know what those are, but I love them. They're tropical. They just remind me of, the beach or whatever, so I like them. And I got it back at the beginning of summer. Whenever I first got it, it was giving me a whole bunch of flowers. It was blooming. It was doing really, really well. At one point, I think I got 5 flowers. And if y'all know anything about those plants, the flower blooms for 1 day and then it goes away. Like it closes up and it's gone. And so I was getting bloom after bloom after bloom. Well, then a few weeks ago, I noticed that it just wasn't blooming. Every time it would get a bloom, it would fall off. And then the leaves were going away. I was losing all the leaves, and looked like it was just little sticks with little bitty leaves sticking off of it. And I did not know what to do. I knew I was watering it like I was supposed to. I was spraying it for spider mites. I was doing everything I knew to do. And so I got on the internet and put in hibiscus flowers, and the first thing I saw was that you need to prune it. And so I read exactly what it was, because in my mind I was thinking maybe I do need to cut some stuff back. And it said to keep like 4 or 5 main branches, but start pruning off some of the other stuff, no more than 1/3 of it. So I went out there, and as hard as it was, because I thought, oh my gosh, I don't hardly have anything, I didn't want to prune it off, I just started pruning it in some places. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, all these leaves are showing up. And I actually had a flower the other day. It was very pretty. And so it worked. And so I was sitting there yesterday, I was looking at this plant, and God told me pruning. And so I was sitting there, wondering, what does this have to do with intimacy? And then I got on my Bible app and I looked up pruning, and it's not really in the Bible very often, especially in the King James Version. But it did send me to John 15, which Eric literally just preached on. Oh, I don't want to do it in here, but I'm gonna get it in the Message. In John 15, in the King James Version, instead of saying pruning, it actually says purging. But in the translation I read at first, it was actually pruning. So that's what So I'm going to read from John 15 in the Message. I went through several versions, but I really like this one. It says, I am the real vine, and my Father is the farmer. He cuts off every branch of me that doesn't bear grapes, and every branch that is grape bearing, he prunes back so it will bear even more. You are already pruned back by the message I have spoken. So I looked up grapevines. Now, growing up in the back of our house, we had a grapevine. My parents got this house from somebody else. They were renting it, actually, and there were grapevines on the trellises in the backyard. So I kind of grew up with grapes, but we didn't know what to do with them. So they didn't grow very well, and now I know why. But I looked up what about grapevines and why the pruning needs to happen. And so I'm going to read to you what it said. And I just thought this was really awesome. It says, grapevines produce fruit clusters on the previous season's growth. 2-year and older wood is not fruitful. Before pruning, a grapevine may have 200 to 300 buds, which are capable of producing fruit. If the vine is left unpruned, which is the vine that we had in our backyard growing up, it was unpruned, the number of grape clusters would be excessive. The grapevine would be unable to ripen the large crop or sustain adequate vegetative growth. So in normal words, what that's saying is that a grapevine is producing fruit from the previous season. So start thinking about the Word of God while I'm saying this. So it's producing fruit from the previous season. It said 2-year and older wood is not fruitful. Only from the previous season. If it's left unpruned, there's going to be so many grapes that they're not going to be able to ripen. You will not get a large crop, and they will not have adequate growth if it's left untended. And then it says the purpose of pruning is to obtain maximum yields of high quality grapes and to allow adequate vegetative growth for the following season. So what's being pruned in this season is for better grapes next season. The grapes that we have this season are from last season, but what we prune in this season is for next season. Okay? And so if you look in John 15, it says, every branch that is grape bearing, he prunes back so it will bear even more. And it says, you've already pruned back by the message I have spoken. So it's saying right there that God is pruning back so that we can bear even more. The fruit that we're bearing right now is from last season. So when I told you, whenever God said, being intimate with me is preparing you for what's coming. What we're in right now and what we're dealing with is from our intimacy from Him last season. We go through seasons in our life, if y'all haven't figured that out. You're in a season right now. You're not in that season anymore. Okay, that's fruit that we're bearing is from that season. But what He's pruning now is for us to be able to have more fruit in the season that's coming, so that we're prepared, so that we're ready. And in my plant, the plant that I was talking about, whenever I was reading up on the pruning, it's not like the grapes. What it said is that a lot of times you have all these buds that are coming up, but the roots aren't able to sustain all of the flowers, and so they fall off. That's why they were falling off and not blooming. The buds were falling off because the roots weren't able to sustain it. So as I was thinking about all of this and meditating on all of this, he was showing me that it's all related. Pastor Eric just said that abiding, the word abide means rooted. One of the words is rooted. And so what he was showing me in that, with the grapes and with the hibiscus plant, is that our root system sometimes cannot, it can't handle a whole lot of fruit. It's just gonna fall off. Some things will just fall off. The roots aren't ready. Okay, they're not deep enough. They're not strong enough. They're not big enough yet. And so he has to prune some things off of us because we cannot carry certain things with us into the next season. We cannot bear the bountiful fruit if we're holding on to stuff that we don't need anymore. Because our roots, as you abide in Him, as you're intimate with Him, your root system is getting deeper and it's getting stronger. It just is. Because you know Him, because you're spending time in His Word. You know how He responds to things. Your root system is growing and growing and growing and growing. So as that's growing, you're able to have more fruit, which is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be bearing fruit. So this morning, and actually I read this verse yesterday, but this morning we were listening to somebody and he brought out this verse, and all of a sudden a lot of this clicked. So I'm going to go to Joel 3:10 in the Amplified Classic. It says, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong, a warrior. So that part where it says, your pruning hooks will turn into spears, your plowshares into swords. And I was like, what does that mean? What he's telling them is that instead of sowing, instead of doing those things, that they were going to become warriors. They were going to pick up their swords. But I was looking at what it is with this. So in John 15, it says, God will prune us back so that we can bear even more. And then in Joel 3:10, it says to put up your pruning hooks and pick up your swords. So I was reading that, I realized what he was trying to tell me. And I'm just going to speak from my experience. From my experience, what I do is I try to prune stuff back myself. What needs to be pruned off of me? And I didn't pull up the scripture. I should have been. Jeremiah, it talks about that he purges the stuff that is not of him. So everything that's not of him, God is pruning. The past, God is pruning. Stuff I no longer need, he's cutting it off. It's dead, it's gone. I'm trying to hold, it's there, and he's trying to prune it off. It needs to be pruned off. But what I'm doing is I have the pruning shear in my hand, and I'm trying to prune it myself. Me. And so what happens is whenever I'm trying to prune stuff off, I'm not getting what needs to be done. I'm not actually doing what needs to be done. I'm not pruning the right things. God is the one to do the pruning. So he says right here, put up your pruning hooks, pick up your sword. What's my sword? The Word of God. And it says, let the weak say, I am strong. I'm a warrior. So what he was telling me in this is that whenever you abide in me, and that's what he says, that Jesus is the vine, his Father is the farmer. The farmer is the one that does the pruning. In every branch that is great bearing, that means I'm already bearing fruit. He's pruning back so that I can bear even more. And it says you've already been pruned back by the message I've spoken. So whenever we're getting into his word, guess what God's doing? We have our sword, we're wielding our sword, he's pruning. We're not doing it. All we're doing is getting into that intimate relationship with him, and as we're abiding in him, we're getting more and more rooted in him. He's doing the pruning for us to bear more and more fruit. It's nothing that we're doing except for spending our time with him, getting into the word with him. See, we try to deal with the past ourselves. And I'm just going to go there because really that's a lot of the stuff that we need to let him prune off that we're holding on to. Or our identity is in something that's in the past. Like instead of this says, let the weak say I am strong, you're saying I am strong. Your identity is in the strength, in his strength. But before you may have been the one that says I am weak. Our identity, our old identity is stuff that needs to be done away with, and we try to deal with it ourselves in our minds, and we can't do that. We go to him, right? He renews our mind. Our minds are constantly being transformed, but we're trying to deal with stuff that only he can do. He's the farmer. We're not. He tells us, put that stuff up. You're not farming. I'm the farmer. And all of that comes through having that relationship with him, and he knows what we need to get rid of. And he will gently tell us, you need to let go of this, because he's pruning, but we're having to constantly go before him and surrender to him. In fact, every day that should be the first thing that comes out of our mouth. Lord, this is not my life, this is yours. Everything I have, I surrender to you. Whatever you will, I'm going to do today. It's not me, but you. And I'm going to follow you. And see, as we're doing that, we're letting go of those things. And sometimes it's hard to let go of. I'm one of those people that whenever, I don't mind God pruning me. It hurts, but I kind of want a whole lot of it done at once so that way I can move on. And he doesn't, a lot of times I'm not ready for that. It has to be gradual. But I like to know those things. And sometimes it's not just him telling you. Sometimes it comes from another person and love. Okay, if somebody's coming to you and saying, you're this, and this, and they're being rude about it, no. But if it's somebody's like your pastor, your spouse, somebody that you trust, that you know has that relationship with God, it may come through them. You know what? Maybe you have a little bit of resentment here that maybe you didn't realize. Maybe there's a little bit of pride here that maybe you didn't realize. So he will use those people sometimes to help you let go of that stuff so he can cut it off. Because as we're bearing more fruit, then that's whenever others are able to see the fruit, and then they're going to be asking us, how are you at peace right now? Why are you so happy all the time? Why is it that nothing phases you? Why do you not have a reaction and you just wait before just things start? Why? How is that happening? And you can share with them, because I have an intimate relationship with the Father. I let him do these things. As I'm spending time in him, just in consequence of that, the benefit of it is that he's pruning these things off of me, and so I'm ready. Because you're already ready for the next season, because he's already gotten rid of that stuff. A lot of it is the past. A lot of it we have to let go of the past. Whenever we go to God, if we mess up and we say, Lord, forgive me, it's already forgiven, it's erased. He does not know what you're talking about. He doesn't know what you're talking about anymore. He doesn't know, because it's gone. It's pruned. And in fact, the stuff that it prunes off somewhere, it talks about him, throwing those dead branches into the fire. They're gone. There's nothing there anymore. And I just want to keep reading in John 15 just very quickly. It says, live in me, make your home in me, just as I do in you. In the same way that a branch can't bear grapes by itself, but only by being joined to the vine, you can't bear fruit unless you are joined with me. See, a lot of times we're trying to bear the fruit, but we're not joined to him completely. You have to be joined to Jesus. We need to know, it says, make your home. He says, make your home in me just as I do in you. We already know that the Holy Spirit lives within us. We are his home. But we have to make our home in him. And whatever you think of home, where you go, that's your comfortable place. That's where you go whenever you're stressed out. That's where you want to be. We were gone for, 3 days from our house, and I was like, I just want to go home and get in my own bed. Okay, that's how it should be with God. We should feel at home, because he is. He is our home. And he says we can't do it by ourselves, but only join to him. Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches. When you're joined with me and I with you, the relation, intimate and organic, the harvest is sure to be abundant. He says that our relation is intimate and it's organic. It just happens. That's what organic means. We're not having to work at it. We're not having to, I can't think of the word right now. I was about to say synthesize it, but that's not right. We don't have to make it up. It's just organic. It just happens. And he says the harvest is sure to be abundant. It's a sure thing. That's his promise. Our harvest is sure to be abundant if we're joined with him. But if you make yourselves at home with me and my words are at home in you, you can be sure that whatever you ask will be listened to and acted upon. And so remember, we talked about that we're waiting for God to take action. We're expecting it. He's acting upon it. And he says it right there. Whatever we ask for, he's listening to and he's acting upon it. Because we are at home with him. And his words, remember, Jesus is the Word made flesh. The words of the Lord are our home. It's at home in us. If his words are at home in us, that means whenever things come against us, that his word automatically comes out of us because nothing else is in there. You see, his words are at home here. So my first reaction, my first response is going to be his word, because I've abided in him and because I've spent that time with him. And that's whenever the fruit really starts showing up. And he says, this is how my Father shows who he is. When you produce grapes, when you mature as my disciples. This is how God shows who he is. Who is he showing who he is? The world. How does the world know who the Father is? When we're producing fruit and when we are maturing as his disciples. We cannot do that without an intimate relationship with him. It cannot happen. So if we want to show who the Father is to the world, that means we have to be completely at home, rooted in him, abiding in him, intimate with him all the time. Not just when we want to. All the time. And then you're maturing as his disciples. It's just like I said, the root at first may not be able to handle this big fruit. But see, as you keep spending that word and that root keeps growing, the fruit is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're able to have more and more and more. Because we're maturing. I'm more mature now than I was even 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I was more mature than I was 6 months before that. I'm constantly maturing, and I'm noticing as I'm spending more time with Him, as I'm being intentional in praying in the Spirit, as I'm being intentional in asking Him things, I'm noticing that my maturity level is kind of kicked up some. My first reaction that my first just that comes out of my mouth, I was able to kind of hone it back, shut it down, and just sit there and pray and think about it before anything came out of my mouth. And by the end of I did this during a couple hours one day last week, and I will say by the end of that day there was a lot of frustration, and I just started crying. And it wasn't because I was doing the wrong thing, but it was because I was having to kill my flesh constantly in order to let God do what He needed to do. And it was a little hard to do. I mean, I didn't notice that till the end of the day. But my point is that even a week ago or 2 weeks ago, I might have had a different reaction because I hadn't spent that time with Him. And so I see the maturity level happening. And I did notice there was a couple of days where I wasn't maybe as intentional with praying because a lot of stuff was going on. And I noticed that then my maturity level kind of went down a little bit, if that makes sense. I was reacting to some emotions rather than letting the Spirit handle it. And so there is He was showing me this week especially, there's direct correlation to those things. My fruit, His fruit in me, that's shown forth in me. The fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, long-suffering. They're much more apparent whenever I'm spending the time with Him, whenever I'm intimate with Him.